His hands were locked around my throat, squeezing the life out of me as the room faded to black. But the true betrayal wasn't the monster crushing my windpipe. It was my own sister, standing 3 feet away, coldly watching me die as she whispered, "Sarah, just sign it." I faced down a lot of terrifying things in my life. As a captain in the United States Army, specifically attached to a logistics intelligence unit, my job is to calculate risk, assess threats, and neutralize them before they tear my team apart. I've been deployed to combat zones where the air was so thick with tension you could taste the cordite. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the war waiting for me inside my own family. It started with a phone call that brought my world crashing down. My commanding officer pulled me out of a briefing at Fort Campbell to tell me that my father, Arthur Jenkins, a retired master sergeant and the toughest man I ever knew, had suffered a massive, fatal heart attack. Dad was my rock. He was the reason I put on the uniform. He raised me and my younger sister Chloe on his own after our mother passed away. But Dad and I had a bond that Chloe never quite understood. Chloe was the golden child, the pageant girl, the cheerleader, the one who always needed to be rescued. I was the one Dad taught to change a tire, shoot a rifle, and stand my ground. When I took emergency leave and flew back to our hometown in upstate New York, I knew I was walking into an emotional minefield. But I didn't realize it was an actual trap. Chloe picked me up from the airport. She didn't come alone. Sitting in the driver's seat of a brand new, obnoxiously loud truck was Derek. Derek Miller, Chloe's husband of 2 years, and a man my father openly despised. Derek was the kind of guy who commanded a room by talking over everyone in it. He wore tailored shirts that were a little too tight, smelled like expensive but overwhelming cologne, and was constantly pitching can't-lose crypto investments or real estate flips. My father, with his 30 years of military intuition, had pegged Derek from day one. "That boy is a parasite, Sarah," Dad had told me over the phone just 3 weeks before he died. "He's bleeding your sister dry. I'm putting a stop to it." I didn't know what Dad meant at the time. I was about to find out. The funeral was a blur of military honors, taps playing in the crisp autumn air, and the flag being handed to me. I was holding it together, relying on my training to keep my grief compartmentalized. Derek, meanwhile, spent the reception pacing the room, aggressively texting, and cornering my father's old friends to ask uncomfortable questions about the estate. 2 days later, we sat in the mahogany-paneled office of Dad's attorney, Mr. Henderson. "Arthur was a meticulous man," Mr. Henderson said, adjusting his glasses. "He updated his will precisely 1 week ago." Derek leaned forward, practically vibrating with greed. Chloe stared at her lap, twisting her wedding ring so hard her knuckle was white. To his youngest daughter, Chloe, Mr. Henderson read, "Arthur leaves a trust fund, heavily stipulated, to be paid out in small monthly increments. It cannot be liquidated, borrowed against, or transferred." "Wait, what?" Derek barked, his face flushing dark red. "He told us he was leaving Chloe the house. We already put a deposit down on a commercial property based on that equity." Mr. Henderson ignored him and looked directly at me. "The family home, the entirety of his life insurance, and all liquid assets totaling nearly $1.2 million are left entirely in the control of Captain Sarah Jenkins. Sarah, your father explicitly named you as the sole executor. Chloe's trust is managed by you. If you deem her financial situation unstable, you have the legal authority to freeze her payouts." The silence in the room was deafening. I stared at the paperwork, my heart pounding. Dad hadn't just protected his legacy. He had built a fortress to protect Chloe from Derek, and he made me the gatekeeper. "This is bullshit!" Derek exploded, slamming his fist on the lawyer's desk. "That old man was senile. We're contesting this." "Derek, stop," Chloe whimpered, shrinking into her chair. "Shut up, Chloe," he snapped, not even looking at her. The pure venom in his voice sent a chill down my spine. He turned his dead, shark-like eyes to me. "You're not taking what's ours, Sarah. You're a soldier. You don't need $1 million. You live in government housing. We have actual business to run." "Mr. Miller," I said, my voice dropping into the icy, authoritative tone I used with insubordinate recruits. "You will lower your voice. and you will not speak to my sister like that again. The will is final." Derek laughed, a harsh, grating sound. He stood up, towering over me, trying to use his physical size to intimidate me. "We'll see about that, Captain." He stormed out, leaving Chloe sitting there, weeping quietly. I tried to hug her, to tell her I would take care of her, but she pulled away. "You don't understand what you've done, Sarah," she whispered before running out after him. Over the next few days, I stayed at Dad's empty house, sorting through his things. That's when I found the file. Dad had hired a private investigator. Inside, a manila folder hidden in his safe, were dozens of pages detailing Derek's actual businesses. Derek was in deep. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to some very dangerous, unregulated private lenders. He had been forging Chloe's signature to take out secondary mortgages. If he didn't get a massive influx of cash soon, he was going to lose everything, and maybe his kneecaps along with it. Dad had cornered him. That's why Derek was so desperate. I immediately called my base command, checking in with a trusted friend, Staff Sergeant Mike Hayes, an MP who had connections with civilian law enforcement. "Hayes, I need a background pull on a civilian, Derek Miller," I told him, feeding him the data. 10 minutes later, Hayes called back, sounding grim. "Cap, this guy has a sealed record, 2 domestic violence charges swept under the rug before he married your sister. And he's currently under federal investigation for wire fraud. Do not be alone in a room with this guy. In fact, I'm routing a request to the local Sid Field office. We take care of our own. Watch your 6. I promised I would. I planned to go to the police the next morning with Dad's file, but that night, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Chloe. "Sarah, please." Derek left. "I'm scared. He packed a bag and said he's leaving me because we have no money. Please come over. I need my big sister." My military training screamed at me that it was a trap. The staging was too perfect. The timing was too convenient. But looking at that text, I didn't see the wife of a grifter. I saw the little girl who used to hide in my bed during thunderstorms. I saw my blood. I grabbed my keys, but before I walked out the door, I texted Hayes, heading to Chloe's house, 442 Elm Street. If I don't text you the word safe by 21:30, send the cavalry. I slipped my legally registered concealed carry 9mm into its holster at the small of my back, threw on my jacket, and walked out into the freezing rain. The drive to Chloe's house took exactly 22 minutes. The neighborhood was one of those upscale cookie-cutter subdivisions where the houses were too big and the driveways were aggressively manicured. As I pulled up, I noticed Derek's truck wasn't in the driveway. The house was completely dark, except for a single dim light in the kitchen. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. My situational awareness was screaming at maximum volume. I checked my watch. 2,105. 25 minutes, until Hayes would trigger the alarm. I walked up to the porch and knocked. The door opened a crack, and Chloe peered out. She looked awful. Her makeup was smeared, her eyes were bloodshot, and she was visibly trembling. She wasn't wearing shoes. "Chloe, are you okay?" I asked, stepping inside as she pulled the door open. He took everything from the safe," she stammered, leading me down the dark hallway toward the kitchen. "I don't know what to do, Sarah. I really don't." "We're going to call the police," I said firmly, keeping my eyes scanning the shadows of the living room as we passed it. "Dad found out Derek is in debt to some very bad people. We need to get you out of here tonight. Pack a bag." We entered the kitchen. The overhead lights flicked on, blindingly bright. I blinked against the sudden glare, and when my vision cleared, I froze. Sitting at the granite island wasn't a crying abandoned wife, and Derek hadn't left. Derek was sitting casually on a bar stool, a smug, predatory grin spread across his face. In front of him were 3 stacks of paper, neatly aligned, and a black pen. I spun around to look at Chloe. She wasn't crying anymore. Her trembling had stopped. She walked past me, stood next to Derek, and crossed her arms, looking at the floor. "Hello, Captain," Derek sneered, taking a sip from a glass of amber liquid. "Glad you could make it to our little family intervention." "Chloe, what is this?" I demanded, keeping my voice level, calculating the distance to the front door. 3 yards. But Derek was between me and the hallway. It's the only way, Sarah, Chloe said, her voice completely devoid of emotion. Derek explained it to me. Dad was just being vindictive. We need that money to save the business. If the business fails, we lose the house. I'll be homeless. You won't be homeless. I control the trust, I argued, stepping back to ensure nobody was behind me. He's lying to you, Chloe. He's under federal investigation. Derek stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the tile. Enough talking. You're going to sit down, and you're going to sign these documents. He tapped the paperwork. I recognized the headers even from a distance. A full, irrevocable power of attorney transferring control of Dad's estate to Chloe and a quitclaim deed for the family home. I'm not signing a damn thing, I said, my stance widening, dropping into a defensive posture. And if you think you can intimidate me, you're out of your mind. I've interrogated insurgents who are 10 times the man you are. Derek's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The fake charm evaporated. He lunged across the kitchen island with terrifying speed. I reacted on pure instinct. As he reached for me, I sidestepped, grabbing his wrist and using his own momentum to throw him off balance. He crashed into the refrigerator, knocking a magnetic calendar to the floor with a clatter. You little bitch, he roared, spinning around. Stand down, Derek, I commanded, reaching back for my holster. But I hesitated. Chloe had moved. She had stepped right into my line of sight, intentionally shielding him. Don't hurt him, she screamed. That split second of hesitation was all Derek needed. He charged like a linebacker, slamming his entire body weight into me. We crashed backward over the dining table, shattering the glass centerpiece. Pain exploded in my ribs as we hit the hardwood floor. I fought back savagely. I drove my knee into his side, hearing a satisfying grunt of pain, and struck out with the heel of my palm, aiming for his nose. But Derek was high on adrenaline, panic, and a desperate need for survival. He was 6'2", and easily outweighed me by 80 pounds. He pinned my left arm under his knee, raining heavy, sloppy punches down on my face. I blocked most of them with my free forearm, but one caught me on the cheekbone, blurring my vision. "Sign the papers," he spit, blood dripping from his nose where I had managed to clip him. "Go to hell," I choked out, bucking my hips to try and unbalance him. That's when he lost his mind completely. He dropped his weight onto my chest, driving the air from my lungs, and wrapped both of his thick, meaty hands around my throat. His thumbs dug into my windpipe. The pressure was instant and agonizing. I clawed at his face, my nails tearing into his skin, but he just squeezed harder, his eyes completely manic. "You're going to sign them, or you're not walking out of this house," he hissed, spittle hitting my face. The edges of my vision started to turn gray. My lungs screamed for oxygen. I kicked my legs, but he was too heavy. I turned my head slightly, my eyes desperately finding Chloe. She was standing right there, just 3 feet away. She wasn't screaming for him to stop. She wasn't calling 911. She was just watching, a tear rolling down her cheek, her hands clutching her elbows. "Chloe." I tried to mouth the word, my vocal cords paralyzed by Derek's crushing grip. "Help me." Chloe looked down at me, her eyes dead and cold. She leaned in slightly. "Sarah, please," she whispered, her voice eerily calm despite the violence erupting at her feet. "Just sign it. It'll be over if you just sign it." The betrayal hit me harder than the punches. My own sister, the girl I had protected my entire life. She was willing to let this man kill me for a payout. The darkness was closing in fast. My thrashing grew weaker. The roaring in my ears was deafening. I felt my grip on his wrists slipping. My training told me I had seconds before I lost consciousness, and minutes before brain death. I closed my eyes, preparing for the end. But the roaring in my ears wasn't just blood pressure. Crack. The sound of the front door being violently splintered off its hinges echoed like a cannon shot through the house. Heavy, tactical boots thundered against the hardwood of the hallway. "Military police! Drop him! Drop him now!" Derek's head whipped up in shock. His grip loosened for a fraction of a second. It was all the space I needed. I gasped a ragged, burning lungful of air just as the kitchen was flooded with the blinding beams of tactical flashlights. The weight crushing my chest vanished so fast I almost didn't process it. 3 figures clad in dark tactical gear swarmed the kitchen. The first one hit Derek like a freight train, driving a Kevlar-plated shoulder directly into his ribs. Derek went airborne, crashing hard into the stainless steel oven door. I rolled onto my side, coughing violently, gasping for air, as fire ripped through my bruised trachea. Through my watering eyes, I saw Staff Sergeant Mike Hayes standing over me, his sidearm drawn and locked onto Derek. "Don't you even twitch, Miller!" Hayes roared, his voice cutting through the ringing in my ears. Derek scrambled, disoriented, his hands covered in my blood from where I had scratched him. He made a desperate lunge toward the kitchen drawer where I knew they kept a carving knife. He didn't make it. The second tactical officer, a towering military police investigator, swept Derek's legs, slammed him face first into the tile, and dug a knee right between his shoulder blades. The sharp snick-snick of zip-tie cuffs echoed off the cabinets. "Get off him! What are you doing? She attacked us!" Chloe shrieked, suddenly springing to life. She dropped to her knees, reaching for Derek, but a third agent stepped between them, putting a firm hand on her chest to keep her back. Chloe immediately shifted gears, her face twisting into a mask of pure hysterical victimhood. She looked at Hayes, tears streaming down her face. "Officer, thank God you're here. My sister, she went crazy. She's trying to steal our inheritance. She pulled a gun on my husband." Hayes didn't even look at her. He holstered his weapon, knelt beside me, and gently helped me sit up. Captain Jenkins, look at me. Can you breathe?" I nodded, gripping my throat, wincing at the agonizing pain. I spat a mouthful of metallic-tasting saliva onto the floor and forced the words out, my voice a broken, raspy croak. "I'm intact. Check the papers." A man in a crisp navy windbreaker with "Seed" emblazoned in yellow letters on the back stepped into the kitchen. This was Special Agent Gregory Harrison, the senior investigator Hayes had contacted. He walked over to the kitchen island, calmly assessing the scattered quitclaim deeds and the power of attorney forms. He pulled a pen off the papers with a gloved hand and slipped it into an evidence bag. "Fascinating narrative, Mrs. Miller," Agent Harrison said, his tone bone-dry. He turned to look at Chloe, who was still sobbing dramatically. "Except, we've been sitting outside in an unmarked surveillance van for the last 40 minutes. We watched your husband assault Captain Jenkins through the dining room window before dragging her in here. And we heard every single word on the parabolic mic." Chloe's fake tears stopped instantly. The color completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a porcelain doll. You're military police," Derek stammered from the floor, his cheek pressed against the cold tile. "You have no jurisdiction here. This is a civilian matter. This is illegal." "You're right about one thing, Derek. I don't have jurisdiction," Hayes said coldly. Right on cue, the wail of sirens filled the neighborhood. Red and blue lights began strobing through the broken front door. Uniformed officers from the state police poured into the house, accompanied by 2 suits from the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Agent Harrison squatted down, so he was eye level with Derek. "Military police are just here to secure one of our own. The FBI, however, is here for you." We cross-referenced Captain Jenkins's tip with an ongoing federal wire fraud investigation. Harrison stood up and looked at the local cops. "He's all yours." As they hauled Derek to his feet, reading him his Miranda rights, Chloe backed away, pressing herself against the wall. "I didn't do anything," she whispered rapidly. "I'm just his wife." "He made me do it. He controlled everything. I'm a victim here." I leaned against the counter, my breathing finally stabilizing. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe that the little sister I grew up with was just a hostage to a monster. But my military intelligence training wouldn't let me ignore the cold reality of what I had just survived. "Check her phone," I rasped, pointing a shaking finger at Chloe. "Check her texts." "You don't have a warrant for my phone," Chloe snapped, a vicious, cornered animal look flashing in her eyes. It was the real her, the mask slipping completely. "Actually, ma'am, we do," an FBI agent said, stepping forward with a folded piece of paper. A federal judge signed off on a blanket seizure of all electronic devices at this residence 20 minutes ago. They found her phone on the living room table. It didn't take long for the digital forensics team to crack it. The twist was so sickening it made my stomach physically heave. Derek wasn't the mastermind. He was just the muscle. The massive debt Dad had uncovered, the unregulated private lenders, it wasn't from Derek's crypto scams or real estate flips. Those were just a front. A convenient cover story they sold to everyone. The debt belonged to Chloe. She had been running an illegal, high-stakes offshore gambling ring out of a private server, thinking she could outsmart the house. She had lost nearly $600,000 to a syndicate operating out of Macau. The investors threatening to break Derek's kneecaps were actually threatening Chloe. She had manipulated Derek into confronting me, pushing him into a violent frenzy because she knew if she didn't get that $1 million from Dad's estate, the syndicate was going to do a lot worse than choke her. Dad had known. His private investigator hadn't just found Derek's dirty laundry, he had found Chloe's. That's why the will was structured the way it was. Dad was trying to save her life by locking the money away, but he didn't realize how far gone she truly was. As the female state trooper clamped the handcuffs onto Chloe's wrists, my sister didn't look at me with regret or apology. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You should have just signed it, Sarah," she spat as they marched her out the door. "You always had to ruin everything." I stood in the wreckage of her kitchen, the blue and red lights flashing across my face, and realized the sister I loved had died a long time ago. The wheels of federal justice turned slowly, but they grind exceedingly fine. For the next 8 months, I bounced between my deployment duties at Fort Campbell and the federal courthouse in Albany. The physical bruises on my neck faded within a few weeks, leaving only a faint yellowing that eventually disappeared. But the psychological scars required intensive therapy. I refused to let it break me. I had a unit to lead, and I had my father's final orders to carry out. The trial was a media spectacle in our hometown. Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Caldwell, a bulldog of a prosecutor, built an airtight RICO and attempted murder case against them. Derek was the first to crack. He was a bully. And like all bullies, he was a coward when faced with someone bigger than him. Faced with the prospect of 25 years in federal lockup for attempted murder, extortion, and wire fraud, he took a plea deal. His defense attorney, William Reston, brokered a 15-year sentence without parole in exchange for Derek testifying against his wife. Sitting in the gallery of Judge Patricia Higgins's courtroom, I watched as Derek laid bare every single one of Chloe's manipulations. He testified under oath about how she had berated him, emasculated him, and finally convinced him that killing me and forging my signature was the only way to save their lives. When it was Chloe's turn to face the judge, she tried to play the golden child one last time. She wore a modest cardigan, kept her hair tied back, and cried softly on the stand, blaming her gambling addiction, blaming Dad for being emotionally distant, blaming Derek for the violence. Judge Higgins wasn't buying it. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Higgins said, her voice echoing in the dead silent courtroom, "I have presided over this court for 20 years, and rarely have I seen a defendant so utterly devoid of a moral compass. You watched your husband strangle your own sister, and your only concern was a signature on a fraudulent document. You are the architect of your own destruction." Chloe was sentenced to 12 years in a federal penitentiary. After the gavel fell, I had one final piece of business to attend to. Mr. Henderson, Dad's attorney, met me in the courthouse lobby. He handed me the updated ledger for the estate. "Everything is secure, Captain Jenkins," Henderson said warmly. "The liquid assets are safely in municipal bonds, and the house has been rented out to a lovely military family. But there is the matter of Chloe's trust." "Executed exactly as Dad instructed," I said, my voice firm. "The trust stipulates that payouts are meant to maintain her basic survival and cover her debts if deemed appropriate by the executor. Is that correct?" "Yes, exactly." "Good." I signed the authorization form, liquidate her monthly allowance to pay back the victims of her gambling ring, and use the rest to cover her court-ordered restitution. She won't see a single dime of Arthur Jenkins's money. Not for commissary, not for appeals. When she gets out in 12 years, the trust will be empty. "A fitting strategy, Captain," Henderson nodded. That afternoon, before I drove to the airport to fly back to base, I stopped at the local cemetery. The autumn wind was biting, tearing the amber leaves from the oak trees. I walked up to my father's headstone, running my fingers over the engraved military crest. I stood at parade rest, looking down at the freshly manicured grass. Mission accomplished, Dad, I whispered into the quiet air. The threat is neutralized. The perimeter is secure. I didn't feel victorious. There is no victory in tearing apart your own family, even when they deserve it. But I felt a profound sense of peace. I had held the line. I had done what I was trained to do, protected the innocent, exposed the guilty, and honored the uniform. I snapped a crisp salute to my father's grave, turned on my heel, and walked back to my car. I had a flight to catch and a squad waiting for me. I was leaving the ghosts behind. If this story taught you anything, it's that sometimes the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones hiding in the shadows. They're the ones sitting across from you at the dinner table. Trust your instincts, stand your ground, and never let anyone manipulate you into sacrificing your worth. If you felt your heart pounding during this story, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs a reminder to stay strong, and subscribe for more intense, real-life drama. Stay safe out there.